Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek that looks at the biggest and most topical issues affecting professional communications. I'm Danny Rogers, Editor-in-Chief of PRWeek. You know, I woke up this morning and I think I had a touch of World Cup fever, which is completely understandable because this is the week when the world's biggest sporting event kicks off in America, Canada and Mexico. But quite apart from the football, and 48 teams are involved this time, 48. This will also be the biggest ever World Cup in terms of brand activity, PR opportunities, and very possibly crisis management communications. So, to discuss some of these issues, I have with me two sports comms experts. I have Steve Martin, who's the founding partner of MSQ Sport and Entertainment, who is very well known in sporting circles and who was, of course, the co-founder of M&C's Saatchi Sport and Entertainment, which he ran for 20 years before leaving to set up MSQ Sport and Entertainment a couple of years ago. Welcome, Stevie. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Good to see you.
Are you going to any World Cup matches?
I am. I'm pretty lucky. I'm going out to New York to see England-Panama and then hopefully the round of 32 games. So looking forward to it, actually.
Very lucky. And we're also very lucky to be joined by Sarah Hartwell, who is Executive Director at 50 Sport, the sports entertainment agency. Sarah has worked with some of the world's leading brands and rights holders to create entertainment-led campaigns that really drive commercial impact. Before joining 50 Sport more than 4 years ago, Sarah held roles at the famous advertising group Adam and Eve DDB. She has worked on events such as the 2022 FIFA World Cup and the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup. Hello, Sarah. How are you?
Hi, Danny. I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you're Canadian.
I am Canadian, although you must excuse the accent. It's gotten a little bit confused over the 20 years that I've been here.
But at least we're not confusing with the Americans, right?
No, that is a key. Most often I get confused for Irish. So.
Interesting.
You wouldn't want that.
But being Canadian, I think you're even more interesting to this discussion, bearing in mind where the World Cup is taking place. And will you be getting out at all?
Sadly, I won't be getting out this time, but we have an army of crews on the ground at all the host cities waiting to bring the fan activity to the...
Yeah, it's very exciting, isn't it? We had a World Cup sweepstakes out in the main area.
Who did you get?
I didn't take part. I was too busy preparing for this podcast, Steve. But but I heard much excitement. It really feels like this week excitement is building, right?
Yeah, it definitely is.
Feels like it's sort of been quite silent around the things. I think these big major events, it always happens because the domestic season's finished and we've obviously had Champions League and end of the Premier League season has been quite exciting and quite noisy. And then suddenly, oh wow, like we're here in 48 hours time, there's going to be a World Cup kicking off, which is going to be one of the probably the biggest sporting event that's ever happened.
Indeed.
Potentially. So it's exciting. Yeah,
it's huge this time, isn't it? And being in America, it's a big global market. Canada's a big global market. This one feels like it's got real scale, although it's got a few issues around it, which we'll come on to discuss. So one of the reasons that I think the excitement has built over the last week is some of the big campaigns have launched, haven't they? So Nike and Adidas. How do you feel they've gone down? Any thoughts on those two big campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like it's almost back to those sort of late 90s, early 2000s, big rock and roll, massive TV spots. Again, and it feels like, the Cola Wars was, the period of time before that. And then Adidas v Nike it's been sort of missing, I think, for a few years. So I've loved seeing it, I have to say. I love that sort of Hollywood approach to these major events. And, they're highly subjective. They're quite different brands. I was at Adidas for nearly 9 years. So I try to take myself away from that and be highly objective as opposed to subjective about these things. But the approaches have been incredibly different. Nike's trying to make a comeback, which is ironic. You'd think they're the biggest sports brand in the world, but they've had a rough time. Their share price all over the place. Adidas's share price is growing, but they've had a mega brand approach again. And I think the big spots that landed are a brand attack. You don't see much product in either of them, but, they're pretty different. And as with these big spots that they've created, they're not just for TV, they're for social. So the behind the scenes is of more value, almost as the one you see front of house, if you like, in the big sort of 3-4 minute spots. And so I think it's been brilliant, and it's set the tone in a way, and it's got the juices going for this World Cup. Almost more than the tournament itself.
I agree. I think that on the face of it, they followed sort of very similar models in that you have these great, big, huge brand spots that are sort of, dominating and harking back to that football era of the late 90s. But then if you delve that one layer deeper, they are really quite different. I think Adidas is really focused on sort of that key moment and that big spot, whereas Nike's really developed an ecosystem that the spot is at the pointy end, but actually the amount that flows out of it is, I think, a real change and showcases that sport and entertainment storytelling that we're seeing emerge much more so.
And of course, is Adidas the official sponsor?
Yes.
Whereas Nike is the guerrilla interloper, isn't it, in that sense? And is that why you think they've taken slightly different approaches?
I don't think that plays into it as much anymore from my perspective. I think it really is about sort of slightly different brand narratives and thinking slightly different about what their positioning and what the opportunity is to them. I think Nike has, as I say, sort of very much sort of created that ecosystem and really lent into that content side of things and thinking about how they can grow the story much more outside of just the TV ad, which I think is a really interesting proposition. It's very similar to sort of the Coke Pepsi side of things, and they've both sort of entered the arena as well, or the pitch, which is an interesting challenge as well.
It is. The only thing I would say is everybody is obsessed with sort of digital and social and creators and influencers, and that's their whole new strategy. I mean, Nike have come out and said this is a completely new way they'll market around the World Cup, but they still default back to a massive TV spot.
Yeah.
So the great irony is these mega films have still got their place. They've obviously brought in a load of creators and talent within that, and that will export to huge audiences worldwide, a very segmented audiences worldwide. Was Adidas have stuck to a very much a storytelling narrative, which I've quite liked. There was a bit more emotion to that, and I thought it was a bit cooler. And again, that's being very objective about it, but I sort of liked that. I felt like I'd halfway through the Nike spot, I'd seen it before, which isn't a bad thing because they're bringing in a new audience to it. But it's great to see that sort of, I love that head-to-head coming back.
I agree with you in the sense that I think Adidas really sort of hit the nail on the head of bringing that community element to it. And obviously you've got your celebrities and you've got sort of, the big stars and AI-generated stars as well, and celebs and athletes. But I think making that story and the narrative around the community element and actually what football means to people, I think is a really smart and insightful way to think about things.
There's no set way to do it. There's no sort of just here's the rule book. Everything's all been ripped up from that approach anyway. And you're starting to see market share being taken now from Nike by Adidas.
Over what period has that been?
Probably over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, Nike took their eye off the ball because they went away from the brand, and the chief exec fell on the sword a wee bit for that, and they went digital and social only, and they took away some of their big bricks and mortar stores. Nike Town used to be a destination, which is a brand destination, not just a store, and they took their eye off the ball, and the share price has had a terrible rough time. So whereas Adidas gone the other way, and they're eating into market share, particularly in football again, and now in running. I mean, running obviously since the marathon, the success of the marathon. I think somebody said to me that they had 1.16% jump in their share price, which was 475 million just overnight from the marathon, and the impact that had. But they're doing big brand plays again, which again they play off each other, these two brands, but it sets the tone for everybody else.
Yeah, it's created a great buzz. I was also wondering, Sarah, about Nike's approach. Presumably that's particularly social media friendly, in that you've got a lot of people in that Nike ad,
you do,
and it's very long. So presumably you can then break it into sections that you can then segment on social media.
Yeah, definitely can. I think that there's in some ways a bit of a misnomer of sort of, create the big ad and then just do cut downs across social. I think the key thing with, really capturing fans' attention and fans' interest really is thinking about actually creating the right content for the right platform, whether that is TV, whether that is social or anything else. It's not about just taking a still and putting an ad of home, but I think it's really about making sure that you think about and ideate the right brand stories for all of the different eventualities that you're going to be putting out.
As you say, it's that whole ecosystem they create. The behind-the-scenes stuff.
Exactly,
it's 6 minutes
behind
long.
the scenes
it's
stuff.
It's got 100 stars in it. You can see the ingredients they're pouring in there to make that. And then, it's relentless how much stuff's out there.
Part of the job is just getting all those stars in the same place, and therefore you create your own stories, don't you? With lots of filming behind the scenes.
I almost think that's more interesting than the film itself. It's how did they do it? And you see there's AIs obviously playing out in a lot of that. You can see that. I think you can see that in the Adidas spot as well. But it's a box of tricks they've got. It's not just about a 24-hour firework hit. It's going to be 5 or 6 weeks. And I would say both brands knowing how they operate. And a lot of the really smart brands will follow a narrative through the tournament as well. So there's probably more to come from them.
So I was about to say, obviously that's just Nike and Adidas. There's many more brands running campaigns around this World Cup. What other trends do we see emerging from the campaigns that you've seen so far?
I think that there's some really sort of interesting fan narratives and really leaning into how fans react with brands. I think the Iron Brew is a very Scottish ad, and as it should be, and you have to really admire it for what it's done and leaning into sort of the audience humor and the fan mindset of actually what that means. It is a fairly historic moment for Scotland, and so you've got to capitalize on that and actually just leaning into your brand truth, which I think they've done really well. But I think putting fans at the center of the comms is really what we're seeing come through.
I have to say that's one of I watch it and genuinely laugh at it.
Yeah.
And not many things can get you to do that from marketing, you know. I think Paddy Power, I think they've done a terrific job as well, and Sky Bet as well. They're using the brands and the assets they've got in terms of the talent they've got, but the creative is brilliant. That Iron Brew, they're going back to their Scottishness and celebrating Scottishness and obviously aligning it to football and that support, but it is genius. And how brave do you need to be to do that? How much money do you need to produce something like that as well? I mean, they've left nothing on the table. But, you know, in terms of the ability now for a lot of these brands who aren't official partners, I think it shows that you can do that probably more easily than ever before. And if I was sitting having paid top dollar for some of the official partner status, you'd be sitting there going, well, we can do this maybe without that big rights fee. And it's used to be heavily, heavily policed, whereas now I think it's the Wild West. Brands can come in and do anything, just align to football. But I think they're being much cuter than that and owning territories. And the Scottishness is obviously the celebration of that. I think it's brilliant creatively.
I really admired the team that walked into that client's office and said, right, football, yeah. Susan Boyle, that's what we're doing. I think that it's genius. And actually, you know, to be able to capture that and see the potential of it, I think really says a lot.
She's in another campaign at the moment with Cornetto. PRWeek has written about
what a renaissance for Susan
Boyle. She's having a moment. Yeah,
yeah, well, let's hope it works out well for her. So, yeah, on Steve's point that, you know, there's official partners, there's unofficial partners, and it used to be, so I've been working this business for a long time as well, and I remember that the official partners of these big sporting events, whether it's the Olympics or the World Cup, they used to have an absolute advantage, right? And these organisations would clamp down on the brands who weren't official partners and restrict their responsibilities. That appears to have gone out the window altogether. And you work for FIFA. So how do you think FIFA feel about that?
I don't want to comment on behalf of FIFA at all, but I think that there is, you know, maybe the proliferation of opportunities to communicate with fans is very different to how it was 10, 20 years ago, where you're really looking at brand ad campaigns, TV campaigns, out of home that are very visible and sort of very in your face, where I think now it is really moving into that sport, entertainment, storytelling side of things, where you're not talking about the World Cup, you're talking about football, you're talking about a moment. You were talking earlier about actually, you know, the moment that football has had in the UK in the last couple of months, you know, with Champions League, with Arsenal, things like that. It really has been an incredible couple months for football more generally. And so FIFA don't own football, but they do a great job at it.
Yeah, I think there's still massive advantages to have to be the official partner, just in terms of the access to ticketing, how you can build your brand over time. So, and that continuity is big. It's also huge from a retail perspective. It's not just the sort of broader PR and social outreach that we see. There's a load of B2B behind a lot of these big campaigns. And the reason that the brands are official partners, that sort of the unseen, but the ability to sort of hijack major events now because of the explosion of digital and social media is pretty wild. Not everything cuts through. I mean, we're probably talking about half a dozen campaigns that we've seen. There'll be 500 more trying to align right down to super local level. But it's almost an easier creative challenge in a way to not be an official partner, because you can have a bit looser, you know, and you can run at something. Whereas I think the guardrails around some of the official partner status, you've got to really play to that absolute rule book, and you can't really veer from it. But some people, that official status obviously gives you, you know, real kudos and an element. And the brand,
hospitality and tickets and pouring rights, and
there's a lot more of a commercial decision underneath it rather than just pure sort of, you know, marketing side of it. It's a really brilliant creative challenge now, way more than it used to be. I think that's why you're seeing these sort of brands coming from nowhere.
Yeah. And I think that there's also something in brands being able to still use the stars of the World Cup that are still very much involved, that, without being that official sponsor, that provides sort of some great equity to be able to leverage. One of the great campaigns that I've seen is with Duracell. And I think that was, the ad campaign was great, but I think the product innovation that they focused on, and actually how they don't just have Messi, standing in a frame with a shoot, but actually really think about how they have this limited edition battery that's mirrored off his leg tattoos. I just think is really genius.
Yeah, amazing.
And that the product innovation is next level.
It is.
Because we've talked quite a bit about brand strategy. What about PR and comms in all of this? I mean, do you feel like PR and earned media has started to gain traction in this whole brand promotion debate?
It is, but it's all much more joined up. It's not as isolated. I mean, obviously we hear these points of view from ad agencies saying that PR is in trouble and should be scared. I read all that last week, which again is great provocation for the industry, and everybody within the PR industry is always on their toes, have been perennially on their toes, trying to keep this story going that PR has its importance. But I think PR is having an extraordinary renaissance. And, if you're talking about brand reputation, one thing, I mean, this World Cup, for example, is probably the most important comms strategy and campaign for nations and for an organisation that we've probably ever seen before. And it's fraught with dangers. Some of the stories that are leaking out in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, there'll be one a day. I mean, the referee story this morning.
I'm going to come on to talk about nation reputation in a moment. But in terms of the brand side of things, do you see brands doing sort of creative and different things with public relations and earned media?
Yeah, they do, because if you think about it, a lot of it's storytelling, like it's editorial approach to it. It's not just, I think, bracketing at PR. I think a lot of what they're doing is trying to tell a story. And that, to me, is where you get really brilliant editorial style approach. Adidas's approach, we go back to what we started at the top of the show. So they will have had different people within the room. It's not just an ad creative. But I also think it's how they extend these out. And it's about third-party endorsement as well. So what you want is everybody talking about your brand, as opposed to you saying how great it is. That sort of PR approach to life is so vital, because if you get it right, it's spectacular. If you get it wrong,
it's also spectacular in a different way.
You're in trouble.
Yeah.
But it's very, very prevalent, I think, particularly for all those brands, because they're launching things editorially. Those big TV ads don't just land themselves. There's a whole strategy of how those are leaked and how those are planted to elevate, and that's all sort of PR led.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting element in having third parties be your brand voice as well. And obviously that lives through PR, and it lives, very strongly through social as well. Thinking about, it can be a danger, absolutely. But if you get it right, thinking about the creators, the influencers that can also help you tell that story and connect with fans and a completely different audience that you would normally, in a really authentic way, is incredibly powerful.
And can you think of any examples of that, where that social media, earned media approach has really made a campaign come to life in a different way?
I think there is an approach, because they're creating assets across the thing and then they're leaking them editorially. These aren't assets that are suddenly on TV. So everything is done through media partners, editorial partnerships, and that is all PR strategy at play. So they might create a central big piece of content, but the World Cup hasn't started yet, so it's not on TV. So to me, that's where they've taken, and it's a different use of an asset. It's not the obvious use where you just get players to amplify things and do media interviews with the player. It's not that. That's where our game has all changed anyway. But, they're not paying for those leaks, if you like, of all the behind the scenes. So honestly, there'll be PR people right at the heart of all those things through almost every one of those campaigns that we've talked about.
I think brands who think about this time as sort of a media moment of being able to place an ad have, in some ways missed a trick. I think you really need to think about it as a broader platform that engages with your audience, engages with fans on a much deeper level, and they're much more likely to win long after the trophy is lifted.
Where you're seeing the strategy side, and I think this is where comms people are at their very best, is knowing when to go and knowing when to land things. So Adidas went very early. And all the headlines around that were Nike's done. And Adidas have created this sort of big Hollywood piece, and it's everywhere. There's columns everywhere. People are sharing it. Again, that hasn't been an ad spot that's been bought. That is all PR led, editorially led. But that was a big call to go early. Nike just kept quiet and they went into the long grass, as they say, and just came out and went bang. And that is a big strategic call to
All
do
of these
that
things
from
are being decided by the comms director.
They really are, and I think that's why I think everything's around these moments are terrifically joined up. Then the PR isn't in isolation, the advertising isn't in isolation, but that's when you get the maximum impact, as we know.
Can we think of any other campaigns or stunts you'd like to mention before we move away from the brand side of things?
We spoke about it very briefly, but I think sort of the Coke Pepsi is really interesting, and I think Coke, being sort of the official sponsor, have done some lovely emotionally driven advertising of, they kind of do what they do best. They very much put their product at the heart and center, but they've connected it in that emotional sense to fans, to thinking about the celebrations, thinking about the absolute heartbreaks and the excitement overall of what the World Cup brings and what football sort of unites everyone.
Is that via their advertising or via their PR? Or
I would say, from what I've seen, it's really strongly through their advertising.
Yeah.
And it, it is really what they kind of, as I say, they do best. It is sort of product led.
Well, I hold my hand up for, we have been doing all the PR for Coke in the US on the trophy tour with FIFA. And that has been an extraordinary experience for our team, because we will come on and talk about, I'm sure, about this diversity of not just US, Canada, Mexico, but even with the diversity within those audiences in those countries. And it's been a traveling roadshow. And, that has been an experiential event. That's an experience where you go and see it. You can't touch the World Cup trophy, and they play in that very, very much. But that has been a huge experiential marketing campaign, which has nothing to do with above the line. It's all PR led. And it's been absolutely fascinating, because the wonder that people have, it creates a bit of magic every time it rolls into town.
Yeah.
So that's been a great success so far, and that's still continuing right up to the event itself.
Okay, the other one I looked at, I noticed, was Burberry campaign. Did anybody see the Burberry work, and what did you think of that?
Again, that's a classic sort of hijack. They've used Declan Rice really well. They've used other talent really well within that. It's a classic sort of British story, trying to be
very British.
Lean into the sort of the whole England thing. They make a big play internationally. They're very British, but in this case, they've sort of almost really focused on the English thing. I mean, Burberry's got an interesting challenge there, because they've been seen a bit sort of aligned to the hooligan side of the game over the years.
Absolutely.
And I think that's been a big brand perception challenge. They seem to have done it pretty well. That spot that they created, I think it's really good. I normally cringe at some of those things, because they're overly egging that sort of Anglified thing and harking on back to 1966, which to me should be like, stop that sort of community, like, stop it now, please. And that's not a Northern Irishman saying that. It's like, they didn't fall into that trap so much, and it was less chest beating, which I thought was pretty cool. And again, socially shared with all their talent. But I think we're going to see loads more in the next couple of weeks,
Sure we are.
Yeah. I think that the thing that they did really nicely is they stayed very true to their brand. And, maybe some of the challenging aspects sort of aside, I think that, holding on to that brand story and who you are as a brand and the positioning really holds true. I think Lego did that very well also. They really focused on the play aspect, which is their entire brand.
Yeah.
And I think being able to bring that in, and they did that, I guess, relatively early as well in the sort of broader things of campaigns. But I think that just resonated really well with sort of all generations, all audiences, to really think about, actually, this isn't just sort of a World Cup moment, but this is our brand moment with the World Cup.
Yeah, and they were super early, as you said, and
Yeah.
I love the playful thing. They've built a World Cup trophy you can buy and everything. Those are things when you look at it, you think, why hasn't that been done before? I've never really understood it.
And that is their strategy, isn't it? They've done that through all sorts, over 10 years or so. They've messed around with this whole play idea. And
a very hot brand, Lego, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to talk a bit about the reputation of the World Cup itself, of FIFA, and even the host countries, and especially the USA. Now, Sarah, I know FIFA, as we've mentioned, is a client of yours, so I don't expect you to comment on their reputation. But as a Canadian, what do you make of how the narrative around the reputation of the host countries is panning out?
Yeah, I think that they are all very individual, as you would expect, but they all really bring sort of an interesting thing to the party overall. I think the USA is very much about sort of the spectacle, is about that sort of commercial value. It is, what America does best. It is the spectacle. Mexico really leans into the soul of football. It is the football nation amongst the three. But being a Canadian, very proud of it. I think that they've done really well. I think Canadian football really represents the inclusivity of what the game is. You only need a ball and a couple jumpers to make it happen. And they're really leaning into that from an inclusivity perspective and also a generosity perspective. I think Mark Carney's done really well to welcome the world with open arms, try and stay out of the politics of it all, which inevitably will come into the World Cup in general. But I think that they have done really well and they've been truly Canadian.
Yeah, there is this sense, isn't there, ever since, I guess, Davos and all the Donald Trump stuff, that Canada has tried to position itself increasingly as more of a European country than a North American country, based on the values and the political standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Mark Carney's got quite a good history of that, being the Bank of England for so many years. So he really knows sort of, what that looks like. And Canada has rebelled against some of the issues that are going on and the politics. In Canadian stores, it is a very different world for what you can buy than it was a while ago. And I think that mirrors sort of what it is that they're trying to do, and sort of moving to where audiences are more open to the Canadian way, as opposed to being the little cousin that, gets scraps.
Yeah.
I think it's very much standing in its own right and being the power that it is.
It must be difficult, though, for Canada, right? Because all the noise is created by the USA. It must be difficult for Mexico as well, to a certain extent. I mean, it's easy to get the sense this is an American World Cup, a USA World Cup, and you forget about the other two footballing countries involved.
It's a big opportunity for them, though. I think because of the issues that are around already and creeping out every 24 hours, as we talked about, the opportunity, I guess, from a Mexican side of things and from Canada is to be incredibly welcoming and to shine a light on that and almost go against the tide of what they're doing and the juxtaposition of what's happening in the US. It's a brilliant opportunity, and I think to create that warmth for Canada, which everybody has always had, almost, dramatize that in a way, because there are going to be so many issues that come out of this World Cup.
Let's come on to talk about that, because there's already been a lot of issues come out, particularly on the American side of things. There's been ticket prices being unbelievably high, what's seen as profiteering in terms of hotel rooms and parking fees and public transport costs. And then, of course, there's all the visa issues, which you alluded to earlier. I mean, how do you feel that's panning out?
I don't know. It's a minefield. I mean, to be the head of comms for FIFA will be an interesting job, because, gone are the days when it'll be about what goes on the pitch. I mean, there's talk about, not allowed to bring water bottles in when this is going to be searing heat. I think it's one of the stories that hasn't really come forward that much. It's starting to creep in now into the narrative, is about just the heat they're going to be playing in. And they weren't going to be allowed to bring any water bottles. Now the FIFA have taken the stance to actually that's okay. Now they're going to renege on that. But you've got the ICE have said that they're going to be part of the security arrangements.
This is ICE, the immigration enforcement.
So there's that. There's some of the ticket prices that I've heard of are just like laughable. I mean, you just don't know whether people are making it up or not. And the inventory has not sold out, particularly around a lot of the smaller games. I mean, one of the dreaded things FIFA will keep them awake at night is seeing empty stadiums, because they made a massive play, having been in Qatar, been in Russia previously, that this was the big sort of massive commercial World Cup that Infantino has wanted. It's going to create $9 billion, of which 2.7 billion is going to go back to the different sort of football federations. So commercially, it is off the charts. But if it doesn't go quite right and there's gaps because the pricing's wrong, the travel, bloody hard to get into the US now. And I mean, I heard this morning there's 12 to 13,000 England fans will go to the match. They'd have been expecting 25, 30,000. So people are sort of sitting a little bit more apprehensive about going, and then there's obviously just the pricing of the hotels, which I guess, the inventory, even the hotel that I'm staying in New York, I wish I'd booked it last week instead of 3 months ago, because the prices have dropped significantly. There's so many things playing out. You hope that once everything starts, the momentum happens, and you always get issues before every major sporting event, whether it's travel or traffic or fan movement. I mean, there's always something, but it feels like this might not go away as quickly as they would hope. And you've obviously got then the Trump sort of, you don't know what's coming from there every day. And I think, you know, he could in danger of overshadowing
what he says on his social media platforms.
You don't know.
With all those things, I think it does present an opportunity for Canada and Mexico to really just run their own race and focus on what it is that they do. And I think, you know, for Canada, but I think, you know, that inclusivity absolutely just falls through everything that they do, and welcoming people with open arms and really wanting to celebrate the game. And I think Canada has got a really interesting opportunity. They are, you know, they mirror the future audience of football. They're, you know, it's very young, it's very up and coming, and so I think provides a real opportunity that they can capitalize on.
I mean, I'm hoping this will be the biggest, most exciting World Cup of all time, because just when you get your head around it, how many cities, how many games over 3 countries, I mean, it's mind-blowing. How does it even work from a fan perspective of moving around? So the challenge they've got and set themselves years ago hasn't changed. In fact, it's now live. And I think the hope is that it becomes incredibly celebratory, because that's what we all remember World Cups to be, as opposed to fraught with issues and things that sort of overshadow it. I hope it doesn't become like that, because when the Americans do things well, like, it really is brilliant.
And I'm thinking back to Qatar 3 years ago, bizarrely, but it was 3 years ago because it was a Winter World Cup, wasn't it? But the interesting thing about Qatar was it was the opposite. It was, all the stadiums were very close. It was very controlled by a single country, and you had different PR issues as a result of that. You had issues around gay rights, for example, or alcohol sales, because it was clearly a Muslim country.
They had that for 4 years. I mean, people now quite short memories, I think, about Qatar, because it was a very successful World Cup in the end. I think because it was so contained, it could be, you know, it was very manageable from that point of view. I think anyone I know who had travelled, and I talk with fans from every walk of life, thought the experience was absolutely brilliant. But for 4 years, they had a drama. You know, it was the workers' pay, the danger in the sites, the gay issue that they had, which in the country, which was crazy. It was fraught with it. But then as day one, as it started, people forgot about it. Yeah. And even now, they sort of go, all right, you know.
Yeah, true.
The people move on very quickly.
But certainly the PR community, I remember, was fairly sort of, you know, mobilised in terms of around those few issues. But this time, you got so many different things going on and so many different stories. I wonder how reputation managers and PR people can get a grip on this. It's just got to be a proliferate of different stories, isn't it?
What you really hope is that the football does shine through, and actually, with everything that is going on, and the countries and the host countries are in a very different place from when they bid to where they are now. They have different relationships, but I think what you can see even now is they are very much sort of, you know, standing side by side for the celebration of football, and you really hope that that is what ultimately comes through it all.
Yeah, I get, you know, the geopolitical tensions are tenfold compared to any other World Cup. I mean, you're talking about a host nation that's at war with actually one of the nations that's playing in the World Cup. Yeah. I mean, think about that. Think about that from a logistical, never mind a comms point of view. So the geopolitical landscape has changed 50-fold since, you know, the last events. And, you know, sport has always been pretty good at staying in and out of politics whenever it suits them. Whereas now I think it's you can't control the narrative. Whereas before it was very much, you could see how things were going to build up. You could see when they would push that away and elevate the positive sides. Whereas just because of the nature of the Trump setup, and because it's so loose and reactionary, you just don't know what's going to be like. I heard him talking about the ticket prices the other day on the plane, and he was sort of saying that's just the way of the world. I mean, these ticket prices are over $6,000 for some of them. That's just the way of the world, he says. You know, how do you deal with that? But I think we're so used to it. We're becoming like almost mind-numbingly sort of, you know, used to it. Like, oh, okay, right, what's going to happen tomorrow?
There's a lot of comms and marketing people work for the national football associations as well. Not FIFA, but the English Football Association and many, many others. How do we feel they are going to have challenges here, and how do you think they're doing so far? Any thoughts?
I think the English FA have done a very good job over the last number of years. I mean, again, they put a stake in the ground really around Gareth Southgate's. You know, when he was manager, that they would open the access more to the teams and the players, and just create a bit more, you know, treat them a bit more like grown-ups, and treat the media like a real stakeholder as opposed to a them and us. And it changed the whole game significantly, and you have a much more of a warmth towards that England team. And I think the FA have continued to do that. I like the way they announced their new squad. I thought that was
which is directly to the consumers,
to the fan, and that hasn't been seen before. And I love the fact that what Mark Bullingham and the team at the FA are actually doing. They're having a right good go.
So they're
and
democratising the whole thing rather than relying on the filter of the media, which is going to annoy the journalists and the media, but I suppose it is at least more closer to the fans, right?
I think that they are talking directly to fans and talking to fans about what is and isn't acceptable, outside of the World Cup, really, taking that stand of what's acceptable and what's not, and actually really making sure that they're not maybe pandering to areas that they shouldn't, but really sort of focusing on actually what is going to make the sport a true and great sport that is.
The same with the Scottish FA. They've done a great job in terms of, they haven't just started the whole story about, we can't believe we're there. Like, they've qualified on their own right, and will have a really good go. And I can't wait for sort of Brazil, Scotland and Miami is the game I'm looking forward to as much as anything. But
the weather will be interesting for them.
Well, I think this is when the heat thing is going to come in, right in the middle of that summer. But
Scott's not being entirely used to hot weather.
No.
Well, this is it. But I think I've really liked the way they've handled it so far. It hasn't been sort of the same old thing that you've heard about, beating the drum and get everyone behind it. It's been a bit classier and a bit more controlled, a bit calmer. I mean, let's see what happens when these rights holders are now behaving like brands, really. I think that's where the whole game changed a few years ago. They're understanding that they have to talk to their fans directly as well. And I think that's what the English FA with the lead on that. They use third-party media and comms very effectively and PR very effectively now. So I've really been quite impressed the way they've sort of gone into this tournament. Let's see that there may be no issues with players during it, who knows, but it's certainly on the way in. It's been very positive.
Yeah, and I think you can really see them sort of acting more and more like a brand through things like kit reveals and squad announcements and things like that I think really are a moment, as you say, talking directly to fans. And so it is sort of acting much more as a brand than ever before, just a governing body.
And I've liked the way, even in the last 2 weeks, those whole pre-sessions where they have all the training sessions, acclimatization. You've seen a different type of media coming in. It's been a lot of creators, a lot of YouTubers, a lot of social channels, all been part of their whole media as part of instead of just the number one sort of sports journals. So they're really mixing it up with sort of the mix of digital and traditional medium as well. So it's all very well thought through. The strategy's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think really working through sort of what those different audiences are and how to make sure that, your fans evolve and that they are, the teenagers and that they are the Gen Z that really sort of are going to bring the sport on. And that change is necessary to stay relevant.
And the players look happier, because I think when they're sort of curtains that used to be put up around them, they're not used to that. And then they're very defensive, on the back foot. And that travels through the camp. You see a happy camp tends to be play well on the pitch too. I mean, there's a direct correlation. So
hopefully a successful camp.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course, you need to win to keep everybody happy, but that's not so controllable by the football associations. I think the Dear England thing, which has been screening British television at the moment, is incredible as a PR exercise, because it certainly makes the audience, the fans, feel much closer to the pressures that the team and the manager and the players are all under. I think I don't know if the FA had any control over that, who knows, but I certainly think it's a genius way of bringing the fans on board ahead of the tournament.
Yeah, I guess the sort of expectation is so high, isn't it, no matter what? I mean, even though not just England, Scotland, but all these teams coming in, the expectations are them, they want to go and win it. They do. And, the expectation is probably more on that England side than ever before in every tournament, and they're starting to handle that pressure, as we've seen in the last 2 or 3 tournaments. And you've seen it with the women's team as well, and women's sport with the rugby teams as well, etc. So, but the expectation going into a World Cup will still be, don't let us down to the nation. And I think it was really clever to shine a light and open that up just to see what the pressures they are going through, because the scrutiny is so ridiculous, and also it can be one tiny thing. All these things are won on the finest of fine margins. So you just hope that they do fulfill their potential, but it feels like there's a warmth that is building as opposed to scrutiny, and those are two different sort of forces.
Okay, so I'm going to finish off by asking each of you who you think is going to win the World Cup. and also any dark horses that might stand a chance of lifting the famous Jules Rimet. Sarah, who's going to win?
I feel that my emotions are pulled in many directions. I've lived here for almost 20 years. I think my head probably says Spain. My heart absolutely says England. I think we spoke about the squad is really strong, and I think they've got a really, really good fighting chance. But my Canadian pride really just wants a Cinderella story.
Are they the dark horses?
Oh yeah, I mean the darkest of horses, I think. But it would be magical even for them to get further than expected. I think it would be great.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously going to default, aren't we, to sort of Spain or France, I think, are the two that would be the standout. Never discount the German team because they know how to play tournaments, and that sounds a bit stereotypical, but they are very good at tournaments. Feels like nobody has even mentioned Brazil in the last few weeks, and I don't really know why. But
they only just qualified, didn't
I know they did, and then Argentina, they're sort of saying, well, between Argentina and Portugal, who have been, hugely successful in the last sort of mega tournaments. I saw a poll the other day that they'll be number 1 and number 2 going out early. So who knows? I have a sneaky feeling England are going to do something this time.
So England's your dark horse.
England is my dark horse, and I hate saying it, being a Northern Irishman, but we're not even at the World Cup, so it's fine. But no, I genuinely think that something might happen. I mean, they need to seriously step up and play with freedom, which I think Tuchel's trying to do. They haven't been that impressive in the build-up so far, but if he can get that healthy balance in the team, and England being a team that looks great on paper, from moving to that to being a team that actually is really great on the pitch, then I don't know. I think that also the way the draw has, sat on their favour as well. I think they're my dark horse.
Okay, that's you heard it here first. That it's coming home.
You'll be phoning me after the first round, I know. But
okay, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I do hope all our listeners enjoy the World Cup experience over the next 5 or 6 weeks. If you're a PR professional, do send us your thoughts at PRWeek.co.uk during and after the tournament. So thank you so much to our guests, Sarah Hartwell and Steve Martin. Thank you, guys. And thank you, listener, for tuning in. Please do come back for more PR Week podcasts, which you can find on prweek.co.uk or download via Apple, Spotify, or indeed whichever browser or your favourite platform. Until next time.